Alright, if you made it that far in the video, I want to show you something. I'm going to try this out because I have to probably do some instructional videos for school, which is okay. So I want to show you a way to do symmetrical scales, or as I like to call them, alternate chromatic scales. And there's different ones you can do, and some of them are common, and I'm going to show you one at the end of this video that is, I don't think, printed anywhere. So the cat's out of the bag. It's kind of a secret, so don't tell anybody. But let's just start with how I think about doing this. So a symmetrical scale is basically any scale where the intervals inside the scale are all the same. The one that's the most common, but people don't even really think about it as a scale really, is actually the chromatic scale, because it's all 12 notes built in half steps, right? And I could play it for you. Everybody's heard it, right? Wow, that was really bad. There you go, it's better. So it's a scale built all in half steps. Now, depending on how you think about doing this, there are a number of ways you can arrange the 12 notes of the chromatic scale to fit so that they make scales or sets of notes where the intervals are repeating over and over and over again in a repetitive pattern. So we can actually extend, for example, let's just stretch the brain here a little bit. Besides half steps, if you've ever thought about the circle of fourths and fifths, think about it. The circle of fourths and fifths is just a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. Everybody's done that for a bazillion years. But have you ever thought about using it as a scale, right? Because think about the rule of a chromatic scale is it's a scale that's built in half steps. So what's stopping you from creating a scale built in fourths or fifths? Because it's just a repeating interval. It just happens to include all 12 of the notes in the chromatic scale. So in a weird way, you actually can... that's kind of its own chromatic scale. All right. So the next step to this is, what other intervals can we use to create other types of chromatic scales? So we'll just jump right into it. The first one is the diminished scale, and I wish I was better with television, I guess, because I need diagrams and things, but hopefully you guys are smart so you can kind of figure this out while I'm playing it just on the saxophone. So the diminished scale is a scale. It's 8 notes long. And the way you build it is by going half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Okay, so that would sound, and I'm playing all this in C because I am not fast enough at thinking in other keys right now to do it any other way. So this is the diminished scale in C, for example. Now, if you take that scale, and let's break it up a little bit, right? So half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Now, there's something kind of special about the diminished scale, and it's going to actually have to do with what we're doing later on here. The diminished scale, there's only a certain number of them, and it's not 12. All right, so that's the first step here. There are only 3 diminished scales. I had to pause and think about that. There's 3 diminished scales. Now, the reason for that I'll show you is this, because if you go half step, whole step, once you get up to a E flat, right, the first set was half step, whole step, so now we're playing C, C sharp, and E flat. when you get to E flat, you actually reset to half step, whole step, don't you? Okay, so we'll just take that like that little snippet of information. You go half step, whole step. Okay, that's good. So, Brainbuster, if you reset that scale on a different note, now specifically C, and take that same set of notes and actually start it on E flat, what you'll actually get is the exact same set of notes. So this is why I wish I had a diagram, okay? Because if I play this scale starting on C, I'm going to play the exact same set of notes. I'm just going to start them on E flat. Okay, now, maybe you could hear it, maybe you couldn't. I wish I had a piano. But that scale is the exact same set of notes, just starting at a different note. Okay, so how is that different from a mode from a major scale? Well, think about major scales. It's a whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So you have a set of whole steps with a half step, and then I can't even do this. I'm going to look like I'm making gang signs. Whole steps here, a half step, and then whole step. The whole steps are actually uneven, right? So because that half step is not exactly in the middle of the scale, depending on what note you start on in a major scale, that half step actually moves to a different part of the scale, right? So, for example, if you start on the second step of a major scale, we get what's called the Dorian Mode. It's a minor scale. What happens in the Dorian mode is instead of going whole step, half step, you're actually now going whole step, half step, whole step, right? So you think about that's the D Dorian versus the C major scale. That half step inside that scale actually moved its location in relation to the other notes in the scale. So hence we have the different modes in a major scale. So when you do that, the scale is asymmetrical. Each time you start on a different note of the scale, you get a different flavor, which is why for major scales, the non-symmetrical scales, it sounds so good because depending on where you start in the scale, you get different types of vibes. So I can make a happy one. But I can take the same set of notes and I can actually make a totally different vibe. For example, kind of a minor-y, I don't know, sad, whatever you want to call it. Same set of notes, you just emphasize a different set inside there, and it gives you a totally different vibe. That's why you have modes, because the location of that half step inside the scale, whenever you switch, that half step kind of moves around in the scale. Okay? Go back to the symmetrical scale, so that diminished scale, you play that thing on C. So, and I can just tell you the notes right now in case you're following along in this video, which would be absolutely amazing if you were trying that out. But C, C sharp, E flat, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C. And I'm definitely using the notes on my tenor because I'm not fancy and I don't talk in concert. At the very least, I'd probably confuse a lot of people in anyway. So if you're playing flute right now, just you can play it in C and then transpose it later if you want. Altos, go ahead and play it in C, right? It's a good thing it's not a band right now because we'd all be playing in different concert pitches, but it's fine. Okay, this is just a tutorial. So, diminished scale starting in C. Half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. We end up getting this sound. Okay. What I said about earlier, when you move that to E flat, it's the same exact set of notes, right? You can keep doing that. So, once you get from C to E flat, F sharp, and A, it's all the same scale. You get the same orientation of half step, whole step. So what that sounds like is this, for example. just added an E in there. That's okay, we'll talk about that in a sec anyways. So 4 diminished scales in the one kind of super scale, right? That's the one diminished scale. Okay. So if there's 4 diminished scales, technically speaking, there's 4 keys inside that one diminished scale. Road bump number 1 that people get confused about when we're trying to do this, because you start the scale in C. Once you get to E flat, it's the exact same order of notes, hence symmetrical scale. We go whole step, half step on E flat, whole step, half step on F sharp, whole step, half step on A. When you get all of those notes together, what you end up getting is the exact same scale, just starting on different notes. That is not like a mode, because when you're in a major scale, you're only going to get the same order of notes or sounds of order of half steps and whole steps if you're in the one step of the scale. So in a major scale, you can only go whole step, half step, whole step, half step if you're starting on the first note of the scale. Every other note on that scale, it's actually a different set of half steps and whole steps. Hence, that's why you have 7 modes to a major scale. Symmetrical scales don't do that. So in the C diminished scale, there's actually only really 4, so to speak, modes. But remember what I said, they're not really modes because they're actually the exact same order of notes. So technically, for those of you without perfect pitch, right, it doesn't matter what note you start on, because the sound of the notes next to each other, the sets of intervals are exactly the same. It's just a different starting note. So let me do that again. If you start on C, then you go to E flat. It's the exact same set of notes, just starting on a different starting pitch. Okay? Now it's kind of like major scales, except, okay, if you played a C major scale and then a C sharp major scale, yes, it's the same set of intervals, but you're using a completely different set of notes, right? So that's 2 different keys. Symmetrical scales, the reason they fit over multiple keys is because you start on a different note and you actually are coming out with the same exact scale and the same set of intervals inside that scale using the same set of original 8 notes. So that's the magic of a diminished scale, and that's the magic of symmetrical scales. All right? So that's level 1 of this madness, because in a sec I'm going to show you how you can expand on this concept. So in diminished scales, we know that E flat, C, and I'm just talking out of order now, I don't know why. Okay, so C, E flat, F sharp, and A diminished are the same scale. There's 4 keys inside C. All right, here comes level 2. I wish I probably should break this video up so that you can actually have a series, but here's level 2. If the one scale covers 4 keys, those 4 keys are covered by the one scale, okay? How many keys are there in the Western chromatic system? There's 12 total, right? So if there's 12 total keys and 4 of them are covered in one scale, just do the math. How many scales are there total until you reset to the original first scale? There's only 3, right? So if we go half step, whole step, half step, and play C. Okay, that's good. Now I'm going to go up a half step and do the same exact set of notes, or same set of intervals. So I'm going to go half step, whole step, half step, whole step, starting on C sharp. It's the same scale, it's just, it's a different set of notes, right? Just like the major scales in different keys. So we do the same thing on D. Cool, there's the third one. Now we get back up to E flat, and look what happens. We're actually back in the territory of the first key that we started in, which is C, just starting on E flat. Yes. So inside that 12 set of chromatic scales, right, or the 12 chromatic notes of the full set, you only can come up with 3 instances where you have an original set of that set of intervals. So we're thinking kind of in post-tonal theory here. Rather than the notes themselves, we're really thinking about the intervals or the spaces between the notes. That's the important part about when we do this. So there's really only 3 fully diminished scales inside the chromatic set of notes that you can come up with. So the first set is C, E flat, F sharp, and A. Okay. The second one is C sharp, E, G, and B flat. Again, I'm talking in tenor key. And then the third one is D, F, A flat, and B natural. Okay, let's take those and just break those apart for a quick sec too. So when you take those notes, the space between those notes is if you've picked it out, is actually a minor third. Minor third, minor third, minor third, minor third. Right? The diminished. That is a diminished chord for those of you who have done some entry-level theory. That happens to be a diminished chord. So the scale that fits this diminished chord is actually the same scale and the same set of notes. So within the C diminished scale, for example, you actually have E flat diminished, you have F sharp diminished, and you have A diminished, and you also have those chords, right? You have C diminished chord, you have E flat diminished chord, you have F sharp diminished chord, and you have A diminished chord, because a diminished chord is built on sequential minor thirds. So again, if you're on C, once I get to E flat, minor third, if I keep stacking minor thirds, all I'm going to be doing is just doing inversions of a diminished chord, aren't I? Right? It's the same thing over and over again. And you can do that in your 3 fully diminished sets. So if you go up a half step, and you go up another half step, but here's the kicker: if you go up another half step, you end up on E flat, don't you? Which then, if you do that again, you're back in the original territory. Right? Okay. So each diminished scale contains 4 scales and 4 chords. We'll start there because there's a lot more to it than that. You can actually play the diminished scale over minor chords, and you can play the diminished scale over dominant chords, okay? And for those of you who are really savvy, you might even picked out that technically there's actually another way to play the diminished scale, because if you're thinking symmetrical scales, why can't we go whole step, half step? So starting on C, for example, now here's where the brain gets really twisted up. If you go whole step, half step on C instead of half step, whole step, so for step 1, we'll go half step, whole step, the normal C diminished scale. If you reverse the set of intervals, instead of going half step, whole step, I'm going to go whole step, half step. So what that is now is this. That actually happens to be what? A D diminished scale starting on C, right? I'm going to do that. Uh-oh, I don't practice those as much. Because you started on a whole step, now you're actually kicked up into the next key up. You're just starting on a different note of that key. So with every starting note, stay with me, you can actually play 8 diminished scales based upon a starting note. Because if I'm in C, if I'm doing the half step version of that, I can cover C, E flat, F sharp, and A. If I'm starting with C and I'm using the whole step diminished, which is just the same diminished scale, you're just starting on a different part, you actually can kick up and start on D diminished, F diminished, A flat diminished, and B diminished, but you just got to start it on C, E flat, F sharp, and A. All right. So that's the first step in this process. What I also want to show you before we end this video is here's where it gets crazy. Okay, if you've stuck around for this long, 20 minutes, that's cool. I thought this whole video explaining this process was going to take 20 minutes total. This is now going to be video 1 of probably 5 or 6 of these things to make this work properly. Okay, diminished scales. I'm going to leave you with this. This is going to make your teeth hurt. All right, so if you take a C major scale, an E flat major scale, an F sharp major scale, and an A major scale, and you smash all those notes together. So what's 7 times 28? 28 notes. I mean, I know there's 12, but here's why this is why this works. This is actually really good. There's 28 notes total. A bunch of them are repeating, right? Because if you play a C major scale and an A major scale, both of those scales have an A, both of those scales have a D, right? You can get rid of that note. If you take a C major scale, an E flat major scale, an F sharp major scale, and an A major scale, smash them all together and get rid of all the repeating notes, what you'll end up getting is a C diminished scale. I don't have my diagram, but I've done this exercise many times. If I end up being wrong, I'm not wrong. Go home and try it. Take a C major scale, an E flat major scale, an F sharp major scale, and an A major scale, and get rid of all the common notes so that you have the one set with non-repeating notes. What you'll end up getting actually is a C diminished scale. Hence, C diminished scale is a combinatorial, new vocab word, combinatorial set or a combinatorial scale built off of 4 keys that are originally based in major. It's the composite of C, E flat, F sharp, and A scale with all the common tones stripped out. So what you end up getting is this symmetrical scale that is actually a combination of those 4 key centers. Try it out. And what you'll find is that if you go up a half step, you can go to C sharp, E, G, and B flat. Same process, you'll end up getting C sharp diminished scale, and so forth with D. Now, once you get up to E flat, F sharp, A, C, same thing. So that's why when you combine those 4, you're just getting a repeating pattern. You're just going to spin it around on its head, and it's going to do this, and it's just a diminished scale starting on E flat. Okay? Full chromatic scales, 12. There are 3 diminished scales. Each diminished scale has 4 keys. 4 times 3 is 12. I'm big into numerology. There are scales where there are 4 scales, and each of those 4 scales encompasses 3 keys. There is a system of 6 scales, in which each scale only covers 2 keys. There are a set of 2 scales in which each scale covers 6 keys. And it all has to do with a combination of major key centering and symmetrical interval sets. So in the set of 12, every division of 12, 4 times 3, 3 times 4, 6 times 2, and 2 times 6, each has its own set of symmetrical scales and key centers that corresponds to that set of numbers. And what's the last one, of course? 12 and 1, 1 and 12. Chromatic, 12 and 1. What's the other ones you say? Well, technically, fourths and fifths are also 12 and 1, 1 and 12. And here's the brain buster. The inverse of a half step up is actually a major 7th, or a half step down is actually a major 7th up. So technically your major 7th cycle can actually be a chromatic scale too. It just sounds very, very odd, I guess, you know. And you just keep going like that. Okay. We'll see how long you guys stick around for this. If I get more than 10 views on this video, I'm gonna be That's going to be kind of cool. But if you stick around to the end, I'm going to show you through these next few videos how to play symmetrically using these symmetrical scale sets. And these are probably not published in a book. Every time I say that, I find them published in a book. So we'll see. All right. Happy practicing.